Page 177. Black. There were less than 2 weeks before I had to report to the DA's office. Everything that was finally happening between Rose and me was going to get cut off cold. I didn't know how that would change things. When you keep a cover on your feelings for so long and they finally break free, it's hard to put them on hold again. Rose said that it was just time, like all the time we knew each other growing up, but I could imagine not feeling her heartbeat now and how warm she was in my arms. I wanted to tell Eddie about Rose and me. I knew that when everything settled down, it would be a bump he'd get over, but that good one-on-one feeling we always had was gone. For now, I didn't want to put one more mountain between us. Rose didn't tell her parents. Her father would have put her under lock and key. Her mother was always walking a tightrope with Eddie. Something like this would have sent her falling for sure. I was worried that when they did find out, I would be sitting in a prison cell upstate. Then they would be knocking me down all the time to Rose, and I wouldn't be there to prove I was somebody different. I couldn't hold it against them. When they let me into their house, they weren't thinking I was going to pull a stick-up with their son and fall for their daughter. Up until last month, the Russos were probably patting themselves in the back for showing a black kid without a father how family was supposed to be. But my mother was standing up taller now than they ever did, even if you stood them up on one on top of the other. My mother had been figured out about Rose and me from the beginning. I was glad because I didn't want to hide anything from her ever again. She didn't connect Rose to her parents or Eddie. My mother didn't even care that Rose was white, but she told me that people were going to keep hammering us for crossing that line. She said that's when we find out how thick our skins really are. I couldn't hang out with Rose around school because of her mother. So we'd walk up and down Steinway Street and stay in the library on Broadway when the weather was nice. We'd go down to Astoria Park and sit on the benches. Rose would take a second and look at every white sanitation truck that pulled past. She was worried that her father's buddies would spot us and tell him that a black kid had his arms around her. I just played it off because I knew that she was under a lot of pressure. In math class, Eddie turned around to see me marking off a calendar. I had a circle around my days left at home and a big X from corner to corner on the ones after that. He was looking right at it. It didn't make any sense for me to pretend it was something else. I gotta figure out how to make the best of these days, I told him. Eddie shook his head and said, "School's the last place I'd be. He pulled up short on his words. "I don't really know what I'd do," he finished, almost one word at a time. "Only you know how it feels." I spent as much time as I could with my mother and Sabrina. I helped Sabrina with her math homework and started doing more chores around the house. I made sure I was home for dinner every night. It was always important to my mother we ate as a family. Now I felt the same way. We'll always be a family. Time apart isn't going to change that, my mother told us at the table. We're going to take from this world everything that makes the spirit grow stronger, and that spirit will keep us from getting torn apart. The things that were most important to me had changed. It used to be playing ball and Eddie and me being big shots. Now it was my family. Soon there was going to be a wall between everyone I cared about and me, but that wasn't going to stop me from keeping focused on them. I already missed seeing Casey every day. For the last 15 years, Casey had coached 11 kids in the basketball team and 40 kids in the football team, but I knew I wasn't just another player to him. When I handed him my uniform, he told me he was still in my corner no matter what, and that when I got out of jail and college coaches called him about me, he would tell them that I was learning from my mistakes. He said I would be a leader on any team and an example of how somebody could put their life back together. I knew I'd always be tied to Casey through Jason. I'd never forget that Jason and me came from the same place and wanted to do the same things. Jason lost his life, and I almost took someone's. Casey looked after the both of us as much as any coach could. Only I was still around to appreciate it. I've thought about Jefferson every day since he was transferred. I asked one of the officers at school if I could call him at his new post, but the officer said that Jefferson couldn't have any contact with students during the investigation. Things like that move slow, and it would probably take another couple of weeks, so I asked the officer to tell Jefferson I'd see him again one day, and if Connolly ever came back, to tell him I said go to hell. I stressed thinking my father would call on my birthday, only I wouldn't be there to hear his voice. I didn't know what would be worse, my father finding out I was in jail that way, or him not calling for another 2 years and finding out from me after I got home. I didn't ask for any money since I got out of Rikers, but for my last week in home, my mother gave me $20 and told me to spend it anyway I wanted. It was impossible for Rose to get out that night, so I dumped any thought of playing ball at the Circle and took Rose to the Saturday matinees at Kaufman Studios. It was the first time we'd ever been to the movies alone. No Eddie, no cousins, it was just the two of us. We walked all the way up to the theater and past the parking lot where Sidney Parker got shot. I didn't want to cross the street to the exact spot, but I showed Rose where it happened. She wanted to get a clear picture of it. It wasn't something that I had to close my eyes to anymore. I I could face what I did and moved on. Rose picked out a lovely story without any guns or violence. The theater was almost empty. We sat halfway back from the screens in the middle of the row and shared a soda. I had my arms around Rose from the start. She leaned her head up against my neck and stayed that way for nearly 2 hours. We watched all the way through the closing credits until the lights got turned up. On the way home, we stopped at the flower shop where Rose bought my mother's bouquet. I got her one red rose to remember the day. "When you leave, I'm going to press this inside a book," Rose said, "and I'm not going to open that page until you get back." That night, my mother went through the list of what she could mail to me upstate. She got a package together of things like toothpaste, socks, and underwear. Sabrina put her Walkman on the pile and said she wanted me to have it. I have never told her where it really came from. I held it tight in my hands and could almost hear that woman scream after we robbed her. I figured it belonged with me in jail. I put it back on the pile and gave Sabrina a big hug. The next morning my legs couldn't keep still. They were itching to play ball after missing out on Saturday morning. The circle was always dead on Sunday. I shot the ball there by myself for 20 minutes. Then I jogged around to some of the other courts in the neighborhood looking for a game. The other yards were empty too. I headed back down 21st Street ready to give up when I heard a ball bouncing on the courts by the Department of Sanitation. I wasn't about to cross over until I saw for sure it was somebody worth playing. Eddie had his back to me. He had let a long jumper go from the corner. It went straight in without even touching the rim. I leaned up against a parked car watching him. Eddie cut right and left with the ball. He hit shot after shot wearing his maroon and powder blue Marauders. His stroke was as smooth as ever, but none of that mattered. I had his timing down from playing with him for so long. Maybe Eddie was carrying around too much inside him. He was a half step slower than usual, and it showed in every move he made. I dribbled the basketball crossing the street, and Eddie turned to see me coming. The EDS was the first place we ever played together, and would probably be the last for a long time. I ducked through a hole in the fence. Eddie stood there with the ball glued to his hip. "I was out looking for a game," I told him, "but I didn't think I'd find somebody this good." "Yeah, I'm just good enough to get beat in the first round of the playoffs," Eddie came back with a straight face. I tossed my ball off to the side and put my hands out for Eddie to pass me the one he was holding. When he did, I pushed it right back at him and started playing defense. We weren't going hard in the beginning, and neither one of us said the score out loud after the first couple of baskets, so we didn't pay any more attention to it. Eddie made an off-balance shot and threw me a smile. I got up tighter on him, and we both got more serious. I knew all of Eddie's moves and beat him to where he wanted to go on the court. When I was offense, I turned the corner on him every time. I pushed him to go faster and faster, but there was no way to keep up dragging everything around with him. After 10 minutes, Eddie needed a break. He was doubled over trying to catch his breath. I sat on the court with my palms flat against the ground behind me. Then Eddie followed. He took his hand off the ball and it rolled away. We were sitting face to face with the sweat coming down on the both of us. The rows of trucks parked outside the sanitation garage were quiet. There was hardly any noise from out in the streets either, and it felt like the only sound in the whole world was from our breathing. There was nothing between us now, except for the line that separates black and white. Only I couldn't tell if it had been there from the beginning. Maybe it snaked its way through when we were worried about saving our asses to see. I don't know if it could ever get erased, or if we could find a way around it. I only knew that I wanted to try.